Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, and in this video, let's talk about India's progress on reducing the dominance of cash in the economy. If I tell you that the use of cash in India has gone down in the past several years, you might point out to me that India now has more cash in circulation than there was before the demonetization in 2016. Yes, that is true. Then, how do we measure or quantify India's progress on reducing the role of cash in its economy? We can look at it in two ways. First, what is the value of transactions in cash as a share of total value of all transactions? Because transactions also take place using credit cards, debit cards, UPI, etc. And second, what is the value of currency or cash in circulation as a share of the size of the economy? Let's start with transaction value metric on a global scale. Worldwide, the adoption of credit cards or digital wallets like Apple Pay, Paytm and Alipay is increasing. As a result, share of cash being used in transactions is plummeting. Look at this graphic. It shows the value of transactions in cash as a share of value of all transactions in that country for the year 2019, 2023 and a projection for 2027. Here's what sticks out to me. In Nigeria, over 90% of transaction value was in cash in 2019. That number has fallen sharply to 55% for 2023. Quite a drop, but even then, more than half of the transaction value remains in cash. Cash is still the king in Nigeria. India was in the same boat. In 2019, over 70% of the transaction value was in cash. But by 2023, that share had fallen precipitously to 18%. And it is expected that by 2027, this share will fall further to just 10%. Which will place India in the company of nations like France, Singapore, South Korea, UK and the United States. These nations are expected to have their transaction value in cash at 10% or lower by 2027 as well. So based on this particular metric, cash is no more the king in India. I was surprised to see heavy use of cash in countries like Germany, Japan and Spain still in 2023. I'm not sure, but I suspect an aging population might have something to do with this anomaly. And based on this metric, the leaders were the usual suspects: Norway, Sweden, New Zealand and so on. China is doing great as well. Let's move on to the second metric, the value of currency or cash in circulation as a share of the size of the economy. We'll talk about why India may have made progress on reducing the role of cash and compare India's situation with that of the United States and Sweden. You'll see why. For the past several years, particularly after the COVID pandemic, India has touted the progress the nation has made on digital payments front. The well-to-do class in India have used credit cards or debit cards for a long time now. They have always had access to electronic forms of payment. But UPI, that is Unified Payments Interface, has enabled almost every Indian who has a smartphone to pay or accept payment using a digital mean or in a cashless manner. In a nation of 1.4 billion, around 750 million Indians have smartphones. That covers a large section of the Indian adult population that has access to digital payments now. So let's quantify how India fares against the global average when it comes to being a cashless economy. To set the stage, here's a benchmark. Sweden leads the world in this space. As of 2023, cash in circulation as a percentage of its GDP was below 2% in Sweden, one of the lowest rates globally. Now let's look at India. As of March 2024, India's GDP stood at about 296.6 lakh crore rupees or about $3.6 trillion. If you add up the value of all 2 rupee, 5 rupee, 10 rupee, 20 rupee, all the way up to 500 rupee and 2000 rupee notes in circulation, it comes out at around 35.5 lakh crore rupees. So, for India, the cash or currency in circulation as a percentage of its GDP stands at roughly 12%. You can see 500 rupee notes make up most of the cash in circulation, followed by 100 and 200 rupee notes. So India is doing much worse than Sweden in digital payments. In case of the United States, as of the available data from 2022, US GDP then was over $25 trillion. Total cash in circulation was over $2 trillion. So here, the currency in circulation to GDP comes in at about 9%, with $100 bills dominating the cash in the system. So the US is doing much better than India, though not as good as Sweden. But there's a catch. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It has been the most widely used international currency since 1945. The rest of the world holds a great deal of US dollars, that is cash, dollar bills. There is a reason for that. Some countries around the world are plagued with unreliable governing institutions that lead to political and economic instability. Countries like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Lebanon, etc. come to mind, Pakistan to some extent. So the residents of these countries tend to hold more dollars. This is good for them as they get a reliable store of value and medium of exchange. So the point is, even though it may seem that the US has more than expected cash in circulation at around 9% of its GDP, not all the cash is inside the United States. A significant portion of that cash is outside the country. Roughly half of all US currency in circulation, that is around $1.1 trillion worth of dollar bills, are outside the US, including over 2/3 of all $100 bills. So the effective cash to GDP ratio for the US sits at 4.5%, much closer to where Sweden is. Going back to India, India's cash to GDP ratio is almost 3 times that of the US. If you check globally, the average for currency in circulation as a share of GDP hovers around 7 to 10% for most countries. In summary, one can argue that cash in circulation as a share of India's economy is still high. But with the rising adoption of UPI, India's cash to GDP ratio will likely go down in the future. Whereas India's value of cash transaction as a share of total value of all transactions is already lower or better than some of the advanced economies like Germany and Japan. And by 2027, this ratio is expected to get even better. I think we can safely say that the role of cash in India's economy is clearly reducing. I hope you found this analysis interesting. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.